past weekend saw New Zealand First gearing up for next year's election campaign at its annual meeting.
2026 and onwards to a massive political victory. Thank you.
Plenty of attacks on other parties flying around, so too some of their former MPs, and coalition partners not spared from friendly fire. So, with about a year left before votes are counted, how's the coalition doing? Kia ora, ko Russell Palmer aho, ane te pūrongo tōrangapū mō tēnei wiki. Welcome to Focus on Politics. The annual general meeting and convention brings the wider New Zealand First membership together to debate policy remits and rub shoulders with the leader. Winston Peters on the Saturday wants to keep things squarely on message.
Our 32nd convention of a party called New Zealand First, and we're not going to be sidetracked with every other party's concerns or failings.
But in his speech the next day, he can't seem to resist a few swipes at his opponents.
Hopkins or Hipkins, what's his name, Hipkins? And then we have Chloe, and as for Te Pāti Māori, a sausage roll leader. It's clear how shallow and impotent they've become. People who are too dumb to know that Karl Marx was responsible. They are anti-white. These people with these bowel sandwiches and waving their hands around like an Italian waiter, anti the wrong blood quantum.
His political attacks at this public event are mostly reserved for the left, Labour, the Greens and Te Pāti Māori. He was willing to criticise his coalition partners behind closed doors.
What were they saying on the left? Well, they said, just re-elect us and we can fix it. This is after they'd blown the country into massive debt. Every problem, they just fixed it with more borrowing. And then those in Parliament on the right said, elect us and we will fix it. And here's the tragedy. If they ever knew how bad things were, they'd have never said that. They would say we could begin to fix it, but it'll take time.
The convention shows the party's efforts to project stability, unity and common sense, something its members support.
Focused on a strong economy, but we're also focused on unity.
Common sense and sensibility. That's what it's all about.
The country has been divided more than ever, and I think that New Zealand First always talks about stability and unity, and I definitely think it's the right message that we need at the moment.
We are the common sense with the pragmatic approach going forward.
The party's economic solution is mandatory KiwiSaver, with workers and businesses putting in 8%, later rising to 10% of an employee's wages, and tax cuts to offset those costs, potentially billions of dollars in lost government revenue. Though Winston Peters has so far refused to detail the cost, timeframes, or explain how the government would pay for it.
That's just a numerical matter. But the difference is that this is not money lost to the economy, quite the converse. This is the money that will be reinvested back in the economy, and that's the difference.
Economist Shamubil Jacob says the KiwiSaver changes are needed, but
I think the tax cuts will be quite challenging, just given the demographics of New Zealand. Our current tax settings are not really fit for purpose, so I don't think the headline buffer will be available.
Christopher Luxon is quick to distance his party from the policy.
Well, look, I mean, every party's going to have its superannuation policy, and you know, I haven't seen the details or the costings or which they're going to need to prepare as part of their election manifestos.
On energy, New Zealand First's second-in-command Shane Jones lambasts a lack of government intervention over high power prices. His officials are looking into more on-site generation powered by wood chips and sawdust to take Kinleith paper mill off-grid. But there are few details on the funding envelope, mechanism or timeframe. It later emerges he's also proposing to renationalise the power companies.
The government policy statement agreed to last year is do nothing and the market will deliver the outcomes. And look, admittedly, I'm a bit player, but know this from me. As soon as I understand what our government's doing, and if it's nothing, then the campaign that I will run on behalf of New Zealand First Party will not only be Trumpian, you'll hear about it in Australia.
Mr Jones attacks Christopher Luxon's, quote, managerialism, saying it won't deliver what society needs. The PM just laughs off all these criticisms on Morning Report on Monday.
Shane Jones, very critical of these. The point was, I guess, is your government doing enough to help some of these struggling...
He's no fan of the interventionist approach.
The reality is bailing out businesses isn't free. I mean, it requires the government to take on more debt, which has to be repaid by all of us. And what we've got to focus on is getting the conditions for growth.
Immigration's also a focus and point of difference for New Zealand First. The fix, another return to an old policy, making immigrants sign up to a statement of New Zealand's values. Except ACT's Brooke Van Velden has already got work started on that.
Well, look, I can't give you too many details because it's very early days, but what I've done is asked my officials to go away and look at a citizenship test or a pledge of values.
And again, Christopher Luxon is not exactly keen.
That's the challenge, right? Who gets to choose what the values actually are? We already have a citizenship oath that New Zealanders make upon citizenship. I just say, migrants make a great contribution to this country. I think we've actually managed immigration really well under successive governments because it has been smart, it's been legal, and it's been linked very much to the economic agenda.
Mr Peters also wants to reconsider the Paris Agreement under which countries signed up to reducing climate-changing emissions. In 2018, he called it the 21st century's existential challenge. He claims his position hasn't changed.
Yeah, of course it is. We can get ourselves out of it.
He now says his previous support for the deal was to curb the Greens' ambitions. Again, ACT has beaten him to the punch, leader David Seymour calling for an exit just the previous week.
Well, they do say that imitation is the most sincere form of flattery.
Well, she says.
No, look, this is just happening too many times.
And again, Christopher Luxon says it ain't happening. ACT and New Zealand First scrapping over the same territory is nothing new. Cast your mind back to 2023 as the election neared.
So could you work with Winston?
Look, I think actually the question is, can anyone? Nobody's been able to. He's fallen out with practically every person he's tried to work with. In his history, this country has serious challenges. This guy's had enough chances already. It's not clear why he thinks he's another one, but it seems he's doing it all for his own purposes rather than New Zealand.
Unbelievable. Look, I've had more court cases at my cost than all these guys got to put together. And he's saying I'm doing it for my own purpose. Jesus.
I'm beginning to pity Christopher Luxon.
But he'll learn.
After the election.
Whatever New Zealand First is doing, it's resonating with some, including former MPs from both major parties. A National MP during the last term, Hariti Hipango, has joined New Zealand First and says whether she contests the next election is up to the party leaders.
We've got a New Zealand that has got some turbulences at the moment. I like the style of the leadership, seeing the issues for what they are, calling it straight, sharp shooting, and the pragmatism behind it.
Former Labour Minister Stuart Nash has also signalled his interest in being a candidate and spoke at the weekend convention. He was long rumoured to be courting New Zealand First and a return to politics, and he has plenty of criticism to throw around, calling the Greens nutty, Te Pāti Māori hypocrites, and accusing the Finance Minister of insulting hard-working New Zealanders. He says Labour has strayed from its values.
Labour got smashed because you've got to talk the language of the people who you want to vote for you. And that's not highfalutin in the beehive, about transgender toilets or saving geckos. It's about jobs, it's about security, it's about law and order.
Labour's leader, Chris Hipkins, isn't too fussed.
Stuart's left the Labour Party, he's free to do what he wants. I've said that Labour's priorities in government next time around will be jobs, health, homes and re-election on the cost of living. I think those are things that working New Zealanders want to see Labour, and they want to see the current government focused on, and they can see that the current government isn't focused on those things.
Well, that was the other criticism coming out of that New Zealand First meeting, is that you were focused on woke ideology, to quote Winston Peters there, and he called you Marxist. That's probably one of the nicer things he said.
Well, the only person that's talking about all of that stuff at the moment is Winston Peters. He seems to be obsessed with other people's genitalia.
Stuart Nash originally lost his cabinet role after a series of missteps. Less than a week after revealing his intentions to return, he's already put a foot wrong.
Former Labour MP Stuart Nash has resigned from his job at recruitment agency Robert Walters after a formal review was initiated by the company. Here's political reporter Lillian Hanley with more.
The resignation comes after Mr Nash apologised for using vulgar language to describe women's body parts on an interview on the digital broadcaster.
So what's going on? And is the coalition holding together? Christopher Luxon is upbeat.
I think there's a very strong relationship, but National New Zealand First, National ACT, I think you've seen a government that's been giving you strong and stable government in the first three-party coalition. We have four-party coalition sitting in Western Europe in an MMP system. I'm very, very proud of actually how our coalition is working. I didn't take those remarks that way at all.
Winston Peters is too, mostly.
It's a work in progress. It's always hard work, but we're doing the best to make sure it works.
David Seymour's also rather positive.
Dangerously united, especially from the point of view of our political opponents, who no doubt
thought it would be easy and the coalition would just fall apart because there's never been three parties in a cabinet before. And yet, if you look at the pace of change and the amount of reform that we're getting done, one of the biggest constraints on the government at the moment is just having time in the Parliament to pass the laws that we have prepared to pass.
But polling has the election on a knife's edge. Right-leaning political commentator Ben Thomas explains how the dynamic of the coalition has been playing out.
Look, the relationships between the governing parties, they are under stress as a result of the environment, as a result of the polling, and as a result of competition for each other's votes as the election draws closer. National is sort of uniquely constrained compared to its coalition partners. New Zealand First can say, if you give us a higher percentage of the vote at the next election, we'll be able to do this, we'll be able to achieve this. ACT can say, we'll bring back the Treaty Principles Bill if you give us, 10% of the vote, 11% of the vote, say. If National, with the Prime Minister and, a number of senior ministers in its ranks, says, vote for us so that we can do this thing, if it's a radical change from, what's happening now, the question is, well, why aren't you doing it now? You're the biggest party, you're the Prime Minister, you're meant to be showing leadership.
The New Zealand First AGM over the weekend, we saw a number of kind of policy areas where New Zealand First are kind of putting pressure on both of their coalition partners. How do you read all that?
Yeah, it's very interesting because there's a couple of ways that these three parties in government can distinguish themselves from each other, which is important coming into the election because their relative position, will to a certain extent dictate the kind of gains and the influence that they have in the government if they form one. One of those ways is to have a clear differentiation in policy. New Zealand First really in the energy space, looking to really differentiate themselves from ACT, who are obviously much less intervention-minded, and from National, who not happy with the status quo, but less given to sort of radical reform. And that's clearly something that Shane Jones has been pushing very hard. The other way that you can differentiate yourself is by doing more of the same thing, wanting a more stringent values statement, by being more hardline on the Paris Agreement, waging an even greater war on woke. And that's the kind of area that ACT and New Zealand First are in. National is a centre-right party, causes headaches for them, looking for those centre voters when its coalition partners are sort of egging each other on, I guess, further onto the fringe on a lot of issues.
We're seeing New Zealand First also kind of talking a lot about Labour, how Labour has kind of lost track of its core base, essentially, saying that they're no longer the party of workers. What do you make of that kind of clash there?
In one sense, New Zealand First have an opportunity that ACT and National don't have, which is that, it sort of ostensibly positions itself in the centre, and that would be more in an economic sense, I guess. On social issues, you would consider it quite to the right. They obviously see a chance to win over more former Labour voters who are maybe disillusioned with the party, particularly on social issues, which are really ramping up in, I guess, prominence as issues, as overseas culture wars happen here, as, and particularly in the post-COVID environment. And that gives New Zealand First an opportunity to grow their base, not at the expense of their coalition partners. Kinleith Mill was one of the things that Shane Jones talked about. Tokoroa is a Labour town. I'm not sure if Labour has said anything about the closure of Kinleith's paper mill, whereas New Zealand First have been up and down and, investigating options. I certainly don't think that they're abandoning the sort of woke issues or the anti-woke issues. That word got a good run out at the conference. I think they're probably cognizant of the fact that there is a cost of living crisis still, and there's certainly the perception of a cost of living crisis. That issue has gone up again in terms of public importance.
Do you think there's any chance of movement in terms of the kind of blocks that we see at the moment?
So all of the polling currently is proceeding on the assumption that there's either a very clearly defined centre-right bloc, which is the current coalition parties, or a centre-left bloc, Labour, Greens, Te Pāti Māori. It's not likely, but it's not impossible to imagine a scenario where Labour, the Greens and Te Pāti Māori could form a government. The coalition parties together could not form a government, but Labour, the Greens and New Zealand First could also form a government. Now, you would need some pretty urgent rapprochement between Labour, particularly Chris Hipkins, and New Zealand First, and you would need to reach an accommodation with the Greens, and the indications are that they're not likely to be the same kind of pushovers that they have been in the past. But that is a substitution that could happen where you could imagine Winston Peters saying, look, I said I would never work with Chris Hipkins again and I had ruled him out, but for the good of the country and to stop an unstable, radical left government, I will, selflessly volunteer to once again be Deputy Prime Minister.
The election is expected in about a year's time, plenty of room for this coalition friction to keep on building. That was Focus on Politics. I'm Russell Palmer. Thanks for joining us. Mā te wā.